and welcome to our next lecture on Art Nouveau, Fauvism, and Cubism, where we will begin with Art Nouveau. So you have an assigned resource over this movement. As you hopefully know by now, it consists of these very curvilinear forms and floral motifs throughout. It's particularly popular with stained glass. A lot of stained glass was used to represent this Art Nouveau style, as well as architecture. So these wavy lines, these curvilinear lines with all the vines and floral motifs. Our museum has a really cool exhibition with a stained glass Art Nouveau piece, so check that out sometime. However, we're going to talk about Gustav Klimt and how he initially was part of this group of Austrian painters, graphic artists, sculptors, and architects who resigned from the Association of Austrian Artists. So they are rejecting the academic style, which we've studied for centuries. And now that we're in modern art, many of these modern artists are avant-garde. They're breaking up the lines of what's been defined by this academic style. And they create the Vienna Secession in 1897. Now, Gustav Klimt, he leaves this group in 1905. There's a big split and disagreement. So the artworks that we're looking at are after this. But just note that he's explicitly rejecting the academic style. And so here we have most likely his most famous work, The Kiss. Oil and gold leaf on canvas. So his artworks are really defined by this gold leaf. And here's why I said that we to pay attention to Agathe Corinne, because later in artists such as Klimt will be influenced by him. So we can clearly see this Japanese influence with the gold background, the gold leaf, the mix of these abstract and geometric forms. And so here we have Gustav Klimt, who has clearly been influenced by Japanese art. Now, remember, gold is often used to represent the divine, and it's associated with spiritual ideas. And so here we have the gold leaf surrounding this couple, the kiss, where he's leaning over to kiss her. Vienna has been transforming into a modern city, just like Paris that we've studied. And so he's abstracting this universal experience from the trauma of everyday life. Like he's pulling these abstract notions and this spirituality in question, these curvilinear, these geometric forms, because they're questioning what life is and the academic life and the academic styles in which they were brought up to or trained to believe in, essentially, don't seem to matter in this new type of life. And so he, like other artists that we've studied in this modern era, want to create new art. And so this gold ground represents some of this awakening, if you will. Gold background. And so he uses this throughout. Now note, Klimt uses these rectilinear forms for the male and the circular forms for the female to represent the differences. And it's this idea of balance, that we can't see this clear difference between the two, that they seem to overlap and be enmeshed in one another. And so it's this almost yin and yang concept of the spiritual complementary forces coming together to create balance. Consider the gold background with the spiritual aspect reinforcing this idea. They're also on this beautiful patch of grass. These new cities are being built up. There's a destruction of the natural world. And so people are wanting to go out into nature. There's public parks being built to accommodate that. So we see that here as well, that desire for nature. But then also consider this slight sense of anxiety where we have the edge of what seems like a cliff and this drastic cutoff, and how her feet seem to be overlapping it. So there is this unsteadiness to the piece, which adds to the excitement and to the allure of it. So Gustav Klimt, it's pretty much impossible. I can't find a really good example. But in real life, when you walk up to these paintings, I saw numerous pieces by him when I went to Vienna. And these figures, their skin color isn't just a singular color. It consists of so many lines of paint. So I want you to think back to pointillism with our Syrah and how it was all these different colors. And when the eye looks at it from a distance, that it creates one cohesive color or shading or highlighting. And Gustav Klimt is doing that as well. See, it's just so difficult to tell, but it's full of these greens. It's shocking. Here is another piece by him, The Embrace, a little bit earlier. You can see where he's experimenting with this style. Another really famous one by him, Portrait of Lady in Gold, now also known as Portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer. This is a really famous painting recently because this is one of the examples of when the Nazis went through Europe, especially with Austria, and wealthy Jews, they stole their paintings. So as they were rounding up, particularly the wealthy Jews, to send them off to concentration camps, they would inventory all of their precious items, including their paintings. And the Nazis would claim it for themselves. And here is one such painting that was in this Vienna museum, and where her niece, right here, most of her family was killed in concentration camps. Her and her husband escaped to America, and she later sued for the Belvedere, the museum, to return this painting to her family because it was unlawfully taken from her. And there's a movie about it, Woman in Gold. I really recommend watching it. It has, what's her name, Helen Mirren and Ryan Reynolds, and it's a really good movie. Highly recommend. And it was a dramatized version of this story, but pretty accurate. I won't give away the ending because I want you to watch it. But here we go. So here is Judith and the head of Holofernes. You can slightly see how he's mixing all of these different colors to create her skin tone. You have this hint of what's actually more of a green color here. It looks blue on this digital photo, but when you walk up to it in real life, it's more green. In fact, it's full of just this green color. It's hard to explain, but I don't know, I guess you just have to see it. And so you see these lines. And it's this mix of all these different colors. And he also created the frame. So this is our Judith and Holofernes. Now we saw that in Baroque art with our Caravaggio and Artemisia Gentileschi. And consider how this one is different, how Gustav Klimt has made this female a little bit more enticing. She's bare-breasted, but we also know that with that bare breast, it's allegorical, or it's also associated with the Amazons and these warriors. That's a little bit of a stretch, though, by art historians, I think, because essentially Klimt really liked to depict female nudes. There's even this academic building in which he painted the ceiling full of female nudes. It was bombed out during World War II, unfortunately. But again, we have these geometric colors. She's not totally centrally placed. In fact, the head is cut off from the canvas. And so he's rejecting even the notions of the centrally placed composition of the academic style. And of course, the background is completely stylized and made up of these geometric shapes. So you can see with that green and all these different colors, this is like the best version that I could find of how when you get up close to it, you can see how he has mixed all these different colors of brush strokes to create a more solid looking skin tone. I love this piece. It's my favorite by him. And then we step back. Here's a later version of Judith. Here's the hair hanging down, or holding by the hair. Okay. Moving on to Fauvism. And for this, I want you to think flat color. Okay. So postmodernism, a little bit difficult to define. Color, because we have Syrah, color with Van Gogh, but also line. We had Auguste Rodin, no color because it's bronze, but we did have line, so it's difficult to define. But here we have Fauvism, and I want you to think flat color. What do I mean by that? This is what I mean by that, flat color. So here is Henri Matisse. going back with post-impressionism, I also want you, of course, to think of Cezanne. Cezanne changes the art world with incorporating different perspectives. Okay, so here we have Henri Matisse, Red Room, also called Harmony in Red. So Fauvism, think flat color. So these artists who are practicing Fauvism, they really favor this brighter and more explosive color. They're going back to the more impulsive brushwork. They are using color in an expressive way, so like our post-impressionists with Van Gogh. And so here we have Matisse. Now, he isn't using it to show his inner turmoil. Instead, Matisse has said numerous times, he said that art should be peaceful, pleasurable, balanced, serene. And so he's using art to try to create this idea of a peaceful balance. I mean, he does that through color. Of course, he's rejecting depth and space, and instead he wants just this flat color. He says color shouldn't imitate nature, but should convey emotion. There's also this unnatural use of line, so consider the outlining of the figure. There's lots of thinking going into what they're going to convey. When I say spontaneous brushstrokes, I mean they're making these quick brushstrokes, but they are planning this out. So it's not an in plein air like our impressionists, just to clarify. But and let's analyze this color. So when you think red, you may think it's somewhat jarring, or we associate with red with anger, right? But consider how Matisse uses red and this flattening of the color and the space and the designs within it to create this idea of this peaceful, calm, serene depiction. He's also incorporated this green and this blue over here to take away from the red, to balance it out. But he's also, again, playing with this idea of rejecting space and depth, and he's rejecting illusionism that was begun by Cezanne. What do I mean by that? Well, of course, the table has absolutely no sense of depth or volume, etc. And we're even confused between the table and then the wall, and they're both similar. This tablecloth matches the wallpaper. And so he's really explicitly showing you that he's rejecting the illusion of space. He's also doing that with this depiction over here on the left. Is this a window or is it a canvas? Another painting that he's incorporated here. You're left to wonder, and he does that intentionally. He's not trying to convey anything naturalistic or a realistic use of color or depth, etc. It's a large-scale painting. Here is a famous piece by him, Woman with a Hat. So we see this female. We have modeling and shading, but we're not using our typical white highlight and black shadow. Instead, he's using color to create this sense of volume, of modeling. And this unnatural use of color. We have these greens, but consider how with Van Gogh's Night Cafe, those greens were very jarring. He described it as ugly. It wasn't aesthetically pleasing. But this use of green is pleasing. It does look balanced. So they're manipulating color. They want it to be expressive. And remember, his goal with color is he wants art to be peaceful and pleasurable, balanced, serene. And so we see that in this painting, in this portrait. And consider how different it is than a realistic depiction of a person, a naturalistic one. They're rejecting the academic style. So primarily from here on out, I'll refer to the previous centuries and this push toward naturalism and realistic depictions of anything as the academic style, in which our modern artists are rejecting. They're all very avant-garde, which now has become part of the institution of art. Now here is his goldfish. Okay, so the purpose of this artwork is he wants it to encourage the viewer to enter the state of contemplative relaxation, to enjoy this painting, to contemplate it. It is a still life painting. There are these contrasts of colors, consider the pink and the green, but these are complementary colors. If we look at our color wheel, they're complementary. So they are aesthetically pleasing and calming, and there is this sense of balance because we're looking, on our color wheel, these are complementary colors. So he uses the goldfish because he talks about this time that he went to Morocco. And when he was in Morocco, it was a very relaxed lifestyle. And he talked about how there were goldfish, these bowls of goldfish in different places, and that people would just sit down, relax, and contemplate these goldfish. And so he sees goldfish as this symbol for a tranquil state of mind. And so since his goal with art is to encourage the viewer to feel tranquil and at peace, he's going to use the symbol of the goldfish to encourage that. He even said that an art that can be a soothing, calming influence on the mind, something like a good armchair that provides relaxation from fatigue. So he wants the viewer to feel calm here. Art has agency. It affects us. And so he's using color to affect the viewers in a positive way. This one is relatively large as well. Okay. So Matisse, think flat color. Okay, again, we're rejecting the academic style. This is unlike the other still lifes. There's no sense of naturalism or illusionism or realistic depiction. And they're explicitly doing so. You could argue with especially the top of this bowl, he very well would have been able to create a naturalistic look, but that is not his priority. His priority is color. Okay, let's talk about Cubism. And here is Pablo Picasso. So you watched a video over Cubism and this breaking up of the picture plane. So one of the reasons why when we looked at that Mont Sainte-Victoire by Cézanne, is I described the little blocks of color. I said cube, even though I'm well aware they weren't a cube, because I want you to always associate really the origin of Cubism with Cézanne, this breaking up of the picture plane, the incorporation of different perspectives. Honestly, I'm in the camp where we give Picasso too much credit, and he essentially isn't coming up with these really original ideas. He's just popularizing ideas that have already been created by other artists, or we'll see other cultures. Okay, so here is Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, very famous piece. We are seeing the female nude, but in a totally different way. So like Cézanne, he is depicting these nudes from different perspectives, right? He's if you're looking at the human body at different angles, he's showing these different angles. Consider that the cloth behind them is uncomfortable. It looks very stiff. And also consider his use of this mix of curvilinear lines and sharp edges. So he has these pointed edges, which is also uncomfortable. There's this sense of danger to an extent where this piece is arguably intimidating, that these females don't look soft or inviting. Think back to like the Venus of Urbino or whatnot. And so they obviously are rejecting these naturalistic depictions. He's incorporating elements of our post-impressionism. And instead, these cubists, they prefer the composition of shapes and forms, abstracted from the conventionally perceived world. He's fracturing up the picture plane. He's showing multiple views and multiple perspectives. And so analytical cubism is where you're analyzing an image from different viewpoints and dissecting them and then reorganizing and putting it back together in a different way. And so we see that here with these constructed girls. Now, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Demoiselle refers to prostitute. D'Avignon is from the red light district. So he is also explicitly saying these are prostitutes. Now that adds another element of how they are explicitly trying to be inviting to gain more customers. This subject matter is scandalous. Then these are nudes. They're staring directly at the viewer, which is also scandalous. They're in these more sexual poses. So Manet had first shocked, the world with explicitly drawing a nude woman staring at the viewer. under the realm of prostitution. Now, Pablo Picasso is shocking the viewer in a similar way, but also with these uncomfortable faces. So Picasso is drawing directly from African art. These should be familiar because they look like African masks. So Picasso spent so much time denying that they were influenced by African masks, or that he was influenced by African masks, yet he had a whole collection of them. Later in his life, there was a whole exhibition about it. So again, I mean, he's pulling from another culture, but for a long period of time, he denies it. Anyway, so this is 1907. It's right when this African art has become really popular. It's being looted or bought and sent across, Europe, just as these Japanese prints were really popular. And so he too is along these ideas of this primitivism, of this idealized life close to nature, etc. Away from Western civilization will make you happier, and these notions of some external paradise that doesn't exist. Anyway, so he's pulling from this African art here. I mean, explicitly. These look like masks. They, yeah, so just be aware. I get that Picasso is a very important artist. He was actually, when we see Picasso paintings, there's this argument of, he can't paint. Like, he's just depicting these unnatural figures because he can't paint. But he was actually a child prodigy. He was able to create naturalistic, realistic, academic style paintings by the time he was a young teenager. I mean, he was a well-known child prodigy. There's some quote, I forget the exact nature of it, but it's something where, like, he was born knowing how to paint, and he spent the rest of his life, I butchered quotes. He was born knowing how to paint like an adult, and he spent his adult life trying to paint like a child. So he's rejecting this academic style and experimenting. So again, here in his studio when he was younger, and where he has all these African artworks. So he is clearly pulling from these African artworks. So so here's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, first Cubist work. Also the idea of primitivism with the incorporation of the masks. George Braque, his close friend. Here's our more analytical Cubism, more typical, where he has broken up the depiction of an object and pieced it together all over the place. He's incorporating text. He's incorporating different elements, different viewpoints. So this is mostly what we think of when we think of Cubism. Our museum has numerous works by both of them. Here is still life with a chair caning. And this is an example of a collage where he's incorporating different materials. Think of how we saw that Degas sculpture where he incorporated the cloth onto originally wax and then bronze sculpture. So here we have this rope. We have what looks like chair caning, but it's actually a print of chair caning. So there's this play on it. But then you've also got this incorporation of these cubists, breaking up of some type of object, piecing it back together in a different way, incorporation of different perspectives, as well as this text that is reminiscent of a newspaper print text. So our cubist of breaking up the picture plane, rejecting the academic style. There ends our lecture.